Weekend caution pared those gains a bit. The Dow Industrial Average closed up 144.32 points at 9325.01. This week it fell twice and rose 3 times.
Coming up next, Al Jazeera Live.
Next week, as you may have heard, the people of the United States will be voting to decide their next president. And the decisions made by the new president will affect, one way or another, all of the 75 countries watching this program. So that's Senator Barack Obama versus Senator John McCain, a Frost Over the World special. Hello and welcome to our Washington studio. We already know there's a new man taking over as President of the United States, and according to the polls, the Democrat Barack Obama, also as we know, is the hot favorite to succeed George Bush. But the Republican candidate John McCain hasn't given up and is hoping to gain ground in the last few days of the campaign. In a moment or two, we'll be speaking to Jesse Jackson, and later we'll hear from Republican supporters Steve Forbes and Pat Buchanan, both, like Jesse Jackson, former presidential candidates. And we'll hear from two interested bystanders. Film star Danny DeVito will tell us of his worries about the voting intentions of Americans, and movie director Oliver Stone will review the Bush years with us, courtesy of his film, W.
I mean, there you go. You fool me once, shame on you. Now fool me twice, and you can't get fooled again.
But first, if Barack Obama does win on Tuesday, he'll become the first black U.S. president. Reverend Jesse Jackson has been inspiring African Americans for the last 40 years. In the 1980s, he was only the second African American to stand for president. His campaign was even bigger in 1988. A civil rights leader and a key supporter of the Democrats, he's now supporting Barack Obama, and is joining me now from Senator Obama's hometown, from Chicago. Jesse, it's very good to have you with us.
Good to be with you again.
Absolutely. And in fact, voter registration, going back to those two great campaigns in 84 and 88, the voter registration that you inspired and achieved back then has really been crucial again this year, hasn't it? It's paved the way for what's occurred.
Well, indeed, David, you know, it's really been a kind of Selma to the White House movement. We just got the right to vote in 1965 for all Americans. White women couldn't serve on juries in Selma. Farmers who couldn't pay poll taxes couldn't vote, and blacks couldn't vote. That was 65. By 1970, David, 18-year-olds got the right to vote. Argument being, if you was old enough to serve in Vietnam, you could vote. By 74, you got the right to vote on campuses, so you could vote where you actually go to school. Then bilingual in 1975, so by the time I ran, we increased more registration. In 84, we won 2 million new voters, and that helped us regain the U.S. Senate. And by 88, we did the same thing again. So that voter registration was a big factor, but I tell you, nothing must diminish the tremendous work Barack Obama has done this year.
And you said on one occasion about Barack Obama, you said he's running the last lap of a 54-year tag team race going back to 1954. Well, and then you went on to say, and there's excitement to see this in my lifetime, because if you're part of a team, whoever scores the touchdown, the credit goes, the victory goes to the whole team.
Indeed it does. And in these great races, you know, the last leg is run by a strong finisher, and he has been a strong finisher. He has an interesting set of characteristics, I think, for this time, David. One, America is going through a crisis of trust. We do not trust our president. Ratings are way down. Don't trust our Congress. It seems to be complicitous with Bush's policies. No, Wall Street seems to be greedy and self-serving. So Barack comes in trusted. Trust is a big factor. Therefore, he can convene people who would shy away from Bush. Secondly, he represents hope. When people are hopeful and not cynical, they begin to try things, do things, come alive again. And of course, it is a redemptive, transformational moment for our nation, going beyond traditional boundaries to vote for Barack Obama.
And what are the most important things you would like him to do first? When I asked you in 1988, what would be the first thing that you would do as you got into the White House, you said, pray. What should he do first?
Pray. and then immediately, of course, he has to use this trust to help build a coalition to get us out of Iraq, just as Bush built the rules of a coalition to get us in. We are losing lives and money and honor at the cost of $10 billion a month. That cancer is spreading as it impacts Iran and Afghanistan and even perhaps Pakistan. So get us out of Iraq. Secondly, to restructure our economy. We have run the limits of banks and greed without checks and balances, without enforcing appropriate laws to stop greed, because our economy is going to tremendous hemorrhage now. And if he does that, those are big steps along the way. And of course, to enforce and fund civil rights law for all Americans.
Your one or two little fusses you've had with Barack Obama, they passed away very quickly, didn't they?
Well, our relation, this is, when I voted for Barack this week, this was my sixth vote for him. I voted for him for state senator primary and general, for U.S. senator primary and general, president primary and general. And so he got my sixth vote. In each vote, I felt prouder because I think he represents something good for America. Barack has a vision. He sees the world through a door, not through a keyhole. It saved us from being so isolated. I think he has the will, the strength to struggle, reconciling races who have been divided for much too long. So between his vision and his capacity to reconcile and his will to fight, he will be for America at this time a great president.
You talked back then and in the past, you've talked about America moving from racial battleground to economic common ground, or another one here, moving towards freedom from racial oppression and racial rejection. Are we at that stage, or will we be at that stage by Wednesday morning?
Well, we're moving in a magnificent way. You know, David, August 28, 1955, Emmett Till was lynched in Mississippi. That was a very horrendous moment in American history. And August 28, 1963, Dr. King addressed us in Washington about his dream beyond the racial predicament of our nation. August 28, 2008, Barack was nominated Democratic Party leader in Denver, Colorado. So we see this evolution of America's consciousness and its development. We see the maturing of America in a real sense.
In terms of the public and the voting public and so on, do you think that the issue of race will still be prevalent? Some people say that there may be a drop-off of 6% in the vote for Senator Obama when people are on their own in the election booth. On the other hand, people say that there are people who in fact would normally vote Republican who will vote for Barack Obama because they feel that's the right thing for America. So, I mean, is the race impact going to be a plus or a minus?
Well, it could very well be a plus, because there are those hung up in the past and can't get out of it, but that some vote Barack because of intrigue as opposed to rejection. Some because he's shown himself to be so intelligent, so smart, so disciplined, such a world view. In contrast to McCain and Palin, who seem to be stumbling by comparison. The Barack Obama Biden ticket has great appeal to a broad cross-section. Of course, what has been exciting this year is to see 18-year-olds voting and college students voting, people coming across ancient lines and divides, choosing direction over complexion. I'm very impressed with this campaign. There have been some ugly moments, but for the most part, it's been a very well-heeled campaign, with both campaigns trying, I think, their very best to keep it at a level that's civil and respectable.
You got, what was it, 1,218 delegates back in 1988. As you see what's happening in the next few days, do you feel a tinge of sadness that it didn't happen to you in 1988?
No, I feel the joy of watching America come into its own. You know, when Reagan said in Berlin, tear down that wall, some of us had to tear down the wall that separated people from each other, whether by race or by region. When the wall's up, on the other side of the wall, there's ignorance and fear and hatred and violence. When the wall's up, people are shot trying to climb the wall. They're shot trying to swim the river. But when the wall comes down, you can then begin to build bridges. So people like Dr. King and Thurgood Marshall, others them, we tore down walls. Now we're building bridges, and Barack is a great bridge building, running a magnificent race across this new American bridge, the hope and new possibilities.
Jesse, thank you very much for joining us. As ever, it's a joy to talk to you, to listen to you, and we thank you from our hearts. Thank you for being with us today, Jesse Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jesse Jackson there, and after the break we'll hear the Republican viewpoint from one of their highest profile figures in the US and an expert, of course, also on finance, publisher Steve Forbes, also from former presidential candidate Pat Buchanan. Join us after this break. Welcome back. Welcome back to Washington, D.C. The tumultuous events on world stock markets have overtaken this presidential campaign somewhat. The markets are down, consumer confidence is falling, and some economists believe we're headed for an all-out global recession. So when looking at Senator McCain's somewhat ailing presidential campaign, who better to speak to than his special economic advisor, Steve Forbes? Mr. Forbes is the head of the group publishing Forbes magazine, and I met him at his New York office and asked what Senator McCain could do now or say that would really help his campaign.
I think he's finally started to do it. This past Monday he had a press conference with Meg Whitman and others by his side and talked about the economy in a crisp, decisive way that I hadn't seen before. Hammering home the redistribution schemes of Senator Obama, the need for cutting taxes, the need for encouraging success, and drawing sharp contrast between him and Senator Obama.
So it could still happen, do you think?
It could. What is amazing is the divergence in the polls. Some have it only a 2-point difference between the two candidates. Others are much wider. So people don't know what the voting turnout will be. The patterns of the past aren't going to hold for this election. So it's still fluid, uncertain, and still a goodly number of undecided voters.
And what about, to what extent will either candidate, if they were to win, have their hands tied by either the gigantic deficit that's been built up and such things? I mean, that's going to affect their ability to do what they want to do, isn't it?
I certainly think it could affect Senator Obama. I don't think he recognizes how bad the economy has affected the government's finances. Senator McCain, I think, will be have a little more equanimity in the sense that he is a fierce foe of spending, and so he'll see this as an opportunity to.
Une longue tournée qui passe ce soir par Genève et un avenir qu'elle veut en forme de sourire. Coquine et coquette, elle en voudra même un de notre caméraman.
Smile.
Senator McCain has said that he will balance the budget, this gigantic budget, by the end of his first term. Is that possible?
It would take miraculous economic growth to do it, but I think he would end up creating a much healthier economy at the end of 4 years.
What about if the result is, in fact, as the polls sort of indicate, but as you say, not definitely indicate, that there is a victory for Senator Obama? What will the Republicans do then? Will they turn as a new leader to Governor Palin, or what?
I think you're going to see a lot of sorting out. I think in Congress, the young Republicans, like this congressman from Wisconsin, Paul Ryan, and others, are going to make a bid to take over the party and set the party back on what they think are its strong traditional principles that we've abandoned in recent years with these spending binges and the like. And I think you're going to see governors emerge. For example, the governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, has done some great things in Louisiana, especially in ethics, which don't always go with Louisiana.
But not Mrs. Palin, you don't think?
I think she'll play a role as well, even though the media in the United States has been very negative towards her. In her time in office as governor, she achieved real things. She brought in a gas pipeline that had been been around for 30 years. She brought it to fruition, did it right, renegotiated taxes and fees with oil companies when they're very politically powerful in Alaska, restrained spending, and gave people a tax cut. Not bad for 18 months' work.
What sort of president do you think Senator Obama would be? I mean, are there things about him that you admire, although you're on the other side?
Well, he is certainly very eloquent. He certainly keeps a cool presence despite pressures on him. But he is totally unknown. All we know is about the people he associated with. He wasn't a governor, so we don't know what his governing style will be. And he's going to face two different kinds of pressures. One pressure will say, be moderate, be like Bill Clinton, go slow. Another will say, try to do it all at the beginning. Even though it will hurt the economy, get it out of the way, and then you can spend the rest of your time trying to get to be popular again. So do you put in his agenda early, or do you do as Clinton did, maybe do a little here and a little there, but see how public opinion treats you?
And do you think that there will be this magic word change that everybody fastens on every 4 years or every 8 years, perhaps not every 4? But, I mean, do you think there will be real change?
Well, the question is, what kind of change? Well, obviously, there'll be new personnel and a new president. But will Senator Obama try to substantially raise taxes? Will he try to keep his campaign promises, or at least some of them, on massively increasing spending? Will he actually put in a timetable for withdrawing from Iraq?
And then we come back to the things we've touched on all through the interview. It's been present throughout the interview. I mean, as you put in your in the magazine in Forbes, do you think that the capitalist system will save us, and we're being saved by March of next year?
I think that if we stop making mistakes, and by the law of averages, we should start to do a few things right, the economies here and overseas will start to show signs of growth by springtime. I think we have to keep in mind that between the early 1980s until this credit crisis of 2007, the whole global economy expanded in a way that we've never seen in human history. Literally several 100 million people starting to join the middle class. We know about India, China, but you saw it in Eastern and Central Europe, parts of Africa, parts of Latin America. And the U.S., as I mentioned, did very well as well. So there's no reason why we can't eventually get back on that track again. This credit crisis was policy made. Bad policies, starting with a weak U.S. dollar.
Starting with a weak U.S. dollar. And what could have stopped it? I mean, if they'd saved Lehman Brothers, could that have saved it?
I think saving Lehman Brothers would have prevented the crisis from reaching the level that it did. It was already bad enough, but that just put it in where the whole financial system almost went into cardiac arrest. That was a mistake. But if 4 years ago, if Alan Greenspan, the Federal Reserve Chairman at the time, had not printed so many dollars, we had this huge liquidity around the world, this bubble, housing bubble, never could have reached the size it did.
So the message that goes out from this conversation then is that by next March, we shall be seeing those little green shoots coming through.
Yes, and not just crops, but also economic growth. And the fundamentals, the strengths are there for it. And if we get a few things right, which we're starting to do, growth will come back.
And we shall live happily ever after.
Or at least live more happily than right now.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir David.
Steve Forbes now. 2008 will be remembered as the year of the self-proclaimed mavericks. First, the Republican nominee, John McCain, and then his running mate, Sarah Palin. But joining me now is the man who's been described as the maverick of all mavericks in American politics, the man whom Richard Nixon, his former boss, said he should be heard. Twice Republican presidential candidate, director of communications back then for Ronald Reagan. Will you welcome, please? Well, you usually say that when there's an audience, but will you welcome, please, Pat Buchanan? Pat, how are you feeling today with the polls suggesting that we may well have a black president? How does that prospect strike you this morning?
I'm reconciled to it, David. I think it's a real probability. It's very difficult to see how Senator McCain can win all of the toss-up states, which he has to do. All of the toss-up states are Republican states, Bush states, and Barack Obama is ahead, and it must be 6 to 8 of those states. So it looks like a Barack Obama presidency, and dramatic Democratic gains in the Senate and in the House as well. I think the country is going to elect a Congress and a president far to the left of where the country is. So it's going to be an interesting 4 years.
And in terms of the process, do you think the fact of a black president will affect things as much as his policies?
I don't believe so. And I think there'll be initially a very dramatic appeal of Barack Obama. But I think by and large the nation and the world get by that very quickly, and they'll look at his policies and his ideas and his directions, and they will judge him on those.
In terms of his declared policies, which is the one that you, a number of which you've obviously criticised, but which is the one that you most hope he doesn't follow through on?
Well, I think he's going to take the Supreme Court, and he will appoint judicial activists to the Supreme Court. And David, it is the Supreme Court dating back to Earl Warren and the Warren Court years which ignited the cultural war in America, because it imposed upon the nation from above, without a democratic process, ideas and ideology which were far to the left of the country, whether it's imposing gay rights or abortion on demand, declaring them constitutional rights, and forced busing in communities that really has torn America apart and caused the culture war. I'm afraid we're going to be going back to that era. Secondly, I think he will hit the most successful Americans with a heavy tax increase, which I think could be disastrous in an economy which is not doing well.
That one as well. Do you think tactically he made a mistake, John McCain made a mistake in terms of his choice of a vice president?
Oh no, I think his choice of a vice president was a smashing success initially. When John McCain picked Sarah Palin, it was the Friday after the day after the Democratic convention. Barack Obama was ahead by 8 to 10 points. Sarah Palin's pick within 3 weeks put McCain back ahead. It put him in the lead. And what happened then, of course, was the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the collapse of the markets in the United States. Clearly, since then, Sarah Palin has been under constant fire from the American media, especially the left media is obsessed with her, and I think they have damaged her to a degree. But Sarah Palin is the reason John McCain was back in the running in September.
And so what should the Republican Party do now? I mean, should they, as it were, tacitly select a new leader if they lose this election?
I think there will be a civil war inside the Republican Party because we don't agree. Conservatives don't agree. I, for example, am an economic nationalist. I think we've been shipping our jobs to Asia. I think we need to secure the border of the Southwest. I think we need to stop the invasion from Mexico, and I think we need to stay out of these foreign wars. Many Republicans are close to McCain. They believe Iraq was a good idea, and they believe we ought to have amnesty for illegal aliens, and they think global free trade's been good for America. So you got those two poles there. You've got the right to life, social conservatives, and then you got folks who are pro-abortion. So the Republican Party, even though it's going to be diminished, is a really house divided against itself.
That's a fascinating summing up, Pat. Great to have you with us indeed. Pat Buchanan. In a moment, we'll be speaking to one of Hollywood's top and most influential movie directors about the film he's just released about the presidency of George W. Bush, a major factor, of course, in the election. Oliver Stone on W comes right after the news. Welcome back. Welcome back to our special program on the US elections, coming to you from Washington, our studios here in Washington. When film director Oliver Stone was looking for his next film, he looked no further than the White House. The man famous for films such as JFK and Nixon decided that he would tell the story of President George W. Bush even before he left office. The result is the film W, which is in the cinemas now, just a week before the election. Before we meet up with Oliver Stone, here's a taste of W.
No. Well, looks like we're hitting it off like grease hits a skillet, huh?
Well, I don't think politics should define a human being. There's more to people than just how they vote.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. You're open-minded. Yeah, much more so than me, I'd have to say.
I read in the paper that you're running for Congress.
Yes, ma'am, I am. And I don't believe in forcing myself on people, so that's why I'm just going to ask for your phone number, not your vote.
You're a devil. Devil in a white hat.
Oliver, it's great to see you again.
Nice to see you again, David.
The movie, W, did you always plan it to come out just before the American elections so it would have an effect on those elections?
No, no. When we started the movie, Hillary Clinton was running against Rudy Giuliani, so it was too specific for us. The W is about for me, a bigger story. It's about a man who's a two-term president who took America to a place where he changed it. He changed not only America, but I think he changed the world. And I think he has an impact of George Bush that is going to last way beyond his exit. I think my grandchildren will be talking about him in 2030, 2040.
When you say George W. took America to a place it hadn't been and so on, was that entirely by what he did in Iraq?
No, I think the whole ideological rigidity and conviction. We're in 3 wars, David. I mean, whatever they say, it really is 3 wars. It's Iraq, it's Afghanistan looms as a bigger war, and as a potential another Vietnam. And then there's the war on terror, which is global. He's declared it as a long war, so is the Pentagon. And we've increased our naval fleet in South America. We've sent a new Army command to Africa. America has bases in 120 countries. We are a legitimate empire, and I think that we have almost $1 trillion military budget. $1 trillion. That's what is that? 1,000 billion. $1 trillion into military. I don't know how our economy, how people in America, where 65% of our budget is military. Our country is on steroids, and I think Bush pushed every button on the way, not only with the war on terror, but using that for political reasons, I think, to enhance his party, politicize the government. And frankly, we can get into it, but he reinterpreted the Constitution. And to give your old hero Nixon, he reinterpreted the Constitution to gain more presidential power.
And in terms of doing that and having that effect, isn't it lessened by the fact that he has been quite rejected by the electorate? I mean, he's not running for this election, obviously, but the figures are very low.
This is true, and I'm hoping for the best. I personally have supported Obama throughout from the beginning. And, you know, I hope for America to take a new direction, but it's going to take time. We can't expect Obama to turn this whole country around. With that kind of military budget, you know America, how do you cut into the contractors? How do you get the money out of government? How do you... These special interests and large corporations are huge gridlock. The media could, the moment Obama, if he were successful, they once said he has 100 days to move, you know, like Kennedy did, move fast. But if he doesn't, media is going to get on him too, you know. So it's very hard to get things done in America, and I'm worried about that. But Bush has dug us into a hole. It's gotten very bad.
And the point is that about the film that's interesting is that you actually, while you obviously disapprove of Bush's policies and so on, and what Bush did, the film surprises people by being quite lenient, not malicious, about George Bush the man.
My politics are what they are, and I'm not hiding them. I'm not trying to be a hypocrite here. When I go to make a movie, I'm a dramatist. I want to tell a good story. This is a great story. This guy went from being sort of a failed black sheep son at the age of 40. He had achieved very little in his life, nothing, in fact. His father was better at baseball, better at school, better at politics, better at making money. The son had no success. So there was a certain bitterness and anger in the man, I think. And from that position, he does a redemption, sort of a prodigal son returns home. And that's sort of the second act of this movie, where the prodigal son is reaccepted and he becomes a businessman and a governor of Texas. Then, I think what is the final twist in the movie is his third act, which is where he becomes president. And here we have sort of the prodigal son meets Icarus if you remember the Greek myth, because he's the son who wanted to fly higher than his father, but whose wings melted when he flew too close to the sun. He died in the sun. Do you remember the story of Icarus?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think Prodigal Son meets Icarus is a great original twist. And frankly, it's not fiction, David. It's true. Nixon, I know you knew him, and I made a movie about him. And Reagan, I see Nixon as his grandfather. I see Reagan as his father. But I think that Bush has had a greater impact than either man, ultimately, in the history of the world.
And do you think that Obama, if he were to win, could change things, but it would take longer and it would be quite difficult? If McCain was to win, which the odds are lengthening on that, but would he continue the trends that you are concerned about, or would he change things too?
He may change things, but he definitely is a warrior. He's declared himself so. He seems to have an us versus them aggressive posture about most situations, Russia, Iran. I don't see a negotiator, a flexible mind at work there. I do think it would be a Bush third term, as Obama has said.
And I mean, as you look at the various characters in the movie, I mean, the performance there of Josh Brolin is very, very good as W, isn't it?
Yeah. He's very you know, Josh, you know, when you act a movie, you have to like the person. I mean, when Mr. Bush gets up in the morning, and we take the point of view that he likes himself. He believes in what he's doing. He believes in freedom and democracy, making Iraq a demonstration model for change in the Middle East. We believe that he sees himself as the good person versus the bad person. It's sort of a Manichaean view of the world. The terrorists are bad guys, evil doers, he's said many times. He's often used Christian phraseology. Josh plays him from the inside out. Josh likes the guy, and he walks in his shoes. And frankly, there is a goofy awkwardness about Bush, a chumminess. If you remember John Wayne, I'm sure you met him. His politics were horrendous. He wanted to nuke Hanoi. He wanted,
the right of Genghis Khan. Yeah.
But when he was on the screen, there was something likable about him, as tough as he was. And I think of Bush as a bit of a cowboy when he won't back down if he makes. You know, at the end of the movie, we have the press conference, and he doesn't apologize. What have you done wrong, sir? And he shrugs. I've done nothing wrong. I've done everything right, he thinks. So that kind of an attitude is very American. It's very cowboy.
Yeah. Did you have any pressure from politicians or authority on the thing? Or the Republicans saying you should do a movie about John McCain for equal time purposes, or anything? Any pressure?
Well, as you know, generally speaking, in my movies are always pounded by certain groups, and you know, the Republicans have never been. But I do think the movie goes down the middle, and I think it's a moderate movie. It's a humanistic movie. And what it does, it puts you in the shoes of Bush and his wife and his administration. It explains Mr. Cheney's point of view, I think, very well and convincingly. It explains Mr. Rumsfeld's point of view and Mr. Powell's point of view. And at the end of the movie, you understand how these people think, why the American people elected them, and how we got to where we are. And now the question is, of course, where do we go from here?
Oliver, thank you so much.
Thank you, David. It was nice to see you again. And good luck with your movie. I hear that you're up against, you're back with Richard Nixon again.
Yes, we're inseparable.
You are.
Oliver Stone there, talking with me about his new movie, W. After the break, another star of the silver screen, Danny DeVito, with a cameo, a vignette, one might say, on his view of American voting intentions. Welcome back. One notable feature of this election has been the outspokenness of many Hollywood stars, for one party or the other. Actually, usually in Hollywood, that means the Democrats. I met up with Danny DeVito earlier, and I asked him in passing if he thought Obama would win.
I'm very optimistic that he's going to win the election, yes.
Are you worried about the Bradley factor of people going into the...
I'm worried about everything. I worry about, you know, there's always that, you know, you want to be positive in life. You want to be right here in this moment saying this is the most important moment of my life. I do worry about, like, little things like somebody pulling the plug. I worry about somebody tripping over a wire. I worry about somebody maliciously doing it. You know, I don't want that to happen. I don't want somebody to say I'm going to be for Barack Obama and then have this inherent, racist thing where they go into the booth, shut the door, and say, "There's no black man going to run my country." Please, in all the goodness that we can muster up, that can't happen. I feel like it's not going to happen in the United States this year. I think we're going to go in there and we're going to tell it like it is, and we're going to make a difference in the world.
The thoughts there of Chairman DeVito, who Danny DeVito is very concerned and follows politics closely, and obviously, as you could hear from that, as a Democrat and so on. We'll be hearing more next week about the actual reason for the interview, which was to talk about his day job, namely movies. And we got into that. That seemed relevant to drop that in this week. But what he said there about American voting intentions is something that I want to take up with Andy Kohut from the Pew Research Center. Now, what are your findings today? 4 days to go. Is Danny DeVito going to get his wish to come true?
Well, he has reason to be optimistic. I mean, the polls that I watch carefully and the poll that I do are showing a pretty sizable double-digit lead at the lowest, an 8 or 9 point lead for Barack Obama. That's a lot. Now, you can't take the American public for granted. The election is still a number of days away, and things could happen, but Obama's in pretty good shape.
And across the board, wide differences? What about Ohio? They say about Ohio that no Republican can win unless he takes Ohio.
I looked last night, and the Ohio polls have about a 5 point lead for Obama. And that's a pretty narrow lead. Ohio might go the other way. But you know what's really surprising? Many of the traditional red states, Obama's ahead. He has about an 8 point lead in Virginia. Virginia hasn't voted Democratic since 1964. North Carolina's in play for Barack Obama. The lead is narrower there. But in many places where we would have said a year ago they're red states, we'll put them in the Republican column, it's not certain.
And what about the age groups? I mean, as between 18s to 34s, and how do they divide?
It's the biggest age gap we've ever seen. Young people overwhelmingly in favor of Obama. Older people, 50 and older, especially 65 and older, white people, not so much for him. In fact, they're pretty evenly divided, leaning to McCain. And a few weeks ago, when the race was closer, we had older people strongly backing, or plurality backing McCain. It would take, as you said, something of a miracle to turn it around now, but you cannot call it now because there could be changes. Well, very simply, this has been the most unpredictable, surprising election I've ever worked in. And so, in a surprising election, always be prepared for another surprise. Plus, there is the issue of his race and whether the polls are undersampling people who are intolerant. The people who turn down polls also are the kinds of people who have a less positive view of African Americans. In my own view, that's a factor. It's probably a small factor. If the race was close, it would be more germane. Well, it's getting to be too late now for an October surprise. That's usually the thing that comes up. And not many days for a November surprise. But anyway, thanks a million for being with us today. Oh, you're quite welcome. Well, as we've heard all throughout this program, it's been a unique election for both parties, whether it's the record-breaking fundraising operation for the Democrats or the nomination of the first woman to run on the presidential ticket on the Republican side. Today's papers reflect the story. There it is, making their case, and then it goes on to say, on the one hand, Obama relishes challenge of a difficult time, whereas, in fact, John McCain, defiant McCain, seeks footing on the economy. So that's pretty believable. There's the front page there of the Wall Street Journal, which has McCain pins hopes on getting party faithful to polls in Ohio. Well, joining me now to talk more about these campaigns, what went wrong and what went right, is former economic speechwriter for President George W. Bush, David Frum, and chief political consultant on Al Gore's Democratic presidential campaign, Tad Devine. Turning to you both, what was the
most important moment for each party in this election? Was there a Damascus moment? David?
Well, for the Republicans, the most important moment was something that did not happen. It was the moment that did not happen in March after John McCain had secured the Republican nomination, where he sat down and worked with advisors to come up with a coherent economic program to deal with the slow malaise in American living standards. We had a crisis in October, and the timing of that crisis could not have been anticipated. But we've had 7 years of very slow, actually no growth, in the incomes of typical Americans, and that was there for everybody to know.
And what was the most vital thing that happened to the Democrats during this campaign?
I think ironically, the most important moment for the Democrats was something that happened to the Republicans. It was the moment that John McCain walked out in public the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed and said that the fundamentals of the economy are strong. I think that when that happened, the American people saw in John McCain someone who was out of touch with the reality, the economic reality of this country.
And what about, we've mentioned, and obviously you have to in any program about the election, what about the choice of Sarah Palin? Was that a plus? Pat Buchanan thought it was a plus at the beginning and not later on. Where would you put that one, David?
Well, it doesn't do much good for it to be a plus at the beginning if it's not a plus later on, does it? That one of the criticisms that people have had about the McCain campaign is that they're so focused on the 24-hour cycle that they omitted the long game. It was just, I wrote this on the first day of she was nominated, and then again a week later, and then again through the campaign. If you put somebody who obviously can't be president right next to the oldest first-time candidate for president, the person who would be the oldest president if elected, a person with a history of health problems, it looks irresponsible. And in a year when people are very anxious, that undercuts you badly, especially since McCain's core case was that on the questions of war and national security, you can trust me more than the other person.
And there wasn't a major, as far as one could see, a major strategic error in the whole of the Obama campaign, was there?
Well, no error which the other side has been able to fully exploit. I think they've run a remarkable campaign from the beginning. First meeting the challenge of Hillary Clinton's candidacy. She was the prohibitive favorite, and they battled toe-to-toe with her, first by raising $100 million in the year before the election, as Senator Clinton did, and then by going in and out-organizing her in Iowa to meet that first test. And I think when there have been stumbles along the way, whether it was the Reverend Wright in the spring, Obama interceded in such a powerful way that he was able to work his way through those problems. So I think it's been a great test, and he has met and mastered it.
I think he did make mistakes, and important mistakes. The Republicans were never able to use them. And I would disagree about the race speech. I thought that was one of the most unsuccessful major party speeches I've ever seen. Obama had a genuine problem. America encountered this man, Reverend Wright, saw his clips, heard his voice, was horrified. And instead of dealing with that in a forthright way, Barack Obama gave this long speech about his own personal autobiography, about race in America, and it was sort of a lecture. And what he was signaling to Americans is, over the next 4 years, anytime I get into trouble, you're going to get an hour-long lecture about race. What Americans really wanted to hear is, do you still believe all those crazy things that you sat there for 20 years? Tell us you don't believe them anymore.
Well, if, and we must still say if, but if, in fact, Senator Obama wins, and John McCain, therefore, loses, who would be the Republican candidate at the next election?
Well, that depends on I have to ask you a lot of questions before I can answer that question. How protracted is this recession going to be? Will we hit
a year and a half.
8% or 11% unemployment? Does Obama veer to the left of his party on economics, or does he put his fate in the hands of people like Robert Rubin and Larry Summers and Paul Volcker? All of those things will have tremendous ramifications inside our party. I can give you the list of people who will be likely candidates. Sarah Palin, of course. Mitt Romney will try again. Newt Gingrich will probably try again. We may hear from some less well-known governors like Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota, and Bobby Jindal may choose this time, or he may wait till 2016, which might be more prudent. And then there will be the question of, does David Petraeus have an interest in politics, and if so, is he a Republican?
That's what is it? Yes, exactly. Tad, who do you think, if you win this time, you'll be facing next time?
Well, I think the Republicans are going to go through a process like we went through in the Democratic Party in the 80s. I think they're going to go back and try to rediscover what their party stands for and represents. And I think when you do something like that, it's likely that someone comes from out of nowhere, the way Obama did. I mean, 4 years ago, Barack Obama was state senator from Illinois. Now he's likely to be the president of the United States. So I think there are people out there in the Republican Party, governors, members of the House of Representatives, perhaps people who can be new television age candidates, who can exploit the internet the way Obama did. And I think it may be somebody who we don't know.
Well, thank you both very much indeed. We look forward to finding out how those predictions work out, assuming that, of course, President Obama is in office within a few weeks. We'll see what happens. We won't predict outcome definitely, even though it does look as though President Obama is a very reasonable bet. Thank you for joining us now. Until next week, goodbye for now.
जब आपका बेटा आपको माँ कहकर पुकारेगा, आइए।